carefully crafted to be suspenseful, engaging, and in line with American storytelling conventions. The suspicious traffic stop. The neon glow of a flickering streetlight cast long shadows over the quiet roads of Arlington, Virginia. It was past midnight, and most of the city was asleep. Naomi Brooks gripped the steering wheel of her silver Toyota, her fingers tight, knuckles pale. She wasn't scared, at least not yet. She was just tired, eager to get home after a long shift at the hospital. Then the flashing red and blue lights filled her rearview mirror. Her pulse quickened. Had she done something wrong? She was sure she had come to a complete stop at the sign 2 blocks back. She always followed the rules, especially at this hour, in this part of town. Taking a deep breath, she pulled over, the tires crunching softly against the pavement. The cruiser stopped behind her. For a few seconds, nothing happened. The silence stretched. Then 2 officers stepped out. Both were white, tall, and broad-shouldered, moving with a slow, deliberate confidence. One tapped at her window with a knuckle. Naomi rolled it down, her hands resting visibly on the steering wheel. "Good evening, officers. Is there a problem?" The taller one, a man in his 40s, with a square jaw and cold, unreadable eyes, leaned slightly toward her. His badge read, S. Calloway. "You ran a stop sign back there." His voice was flat. Naomi blinked. No, sir. I stopped. I'm certain of it." Calloway exhaled through his nose, as if already tired of the conversation. "License and registration." She hesitated but reached for her purse, moving slowly and deliberately. The second officer, a younger man with a buzz cut, shifted closer, his hand resting near his holster. Naomi's stomach tightened. She knew the drill, knew what could happen. She wasn't resisting. She wasn't arguing. But something about their stance, the way they surrounded her, felt off. She handed over her license and registration, her hands steady. "Officer, I promise you, I stopped at that sign." Calloway ignored her, studying the documents. The younger officer circled the back of her car, shining his flashlight through the rear windshield. A static-laced voice crackled from the radio on Calloway's shoulder, but he didn't respond. Instead, he looked at Naomi again, his expression unreadable. "Step out of the car." Her breath caught in her throat. "Why?" she asked carefully. "Step out now." The air around them seemed to hum with unspoken tension. Naomi's hands trembled slightly as she reached for the door handle. Every instinct screamed at her to stay inside, to demand an explanation. But she knew better. She had no choice. She had to comply. As she stepped onto the pavement, the night swallowed her whole. The cold night air wrapped around Naomi as she stood outside her car, her pulse hammering in her ears. She kept her hands visible, fingers slightly spread, just as she had been taught. Just as any black woman in America knew to do when stopped by the police. Officer Calloway, no, Ethan Walker, according to his badge, stepped back as his partner, Daniel Reed, moved toward the trunk. "We're going to conduct a routine search," Walker said, though his tone made it clear that this wasn't a request. Naomi's jaw tightened. She knew her rights, but she also knew how easily things could escalate if she pushed back. "I didn't consent to a search," she said evenly. Reed shot her a look. "That's so? Well, lucky for us, we have probable cause." He popped the trunk before she could say another word. Naomi watched, her breath steady, but her mind racing. This wasn't right. She had nothing to hide, nothing illegal in her car. So why did she feel a knot of dread tightening in her gut? Reed rummaged through the trunk, shoving aside her gym bag, her spare shoes, the first aid kit she always kept in case of emergencies. Then he made a low sound of satisfaction. Bingo. Naomi's eyes snapped to him. In his hand, illuminated by the streetlight, was a small plastic bag filled with white powder. Her stomach dropped. "That's not mine," she said immediately. Walker skied under his breath. "Yeah, that's what they all say." Naomi took a step forward, her hands still raised. "I swear to you, that wasn't in my car when I left work," Reed smirked. "Well, it's here now, and guess what? We're feeling generous tonight. You tell us where you got it, who you're selling to, and maybe we cut you a deal." Panic licked at the edges of her composure, but Naomi forced herself to stay calm. This was bad, worse than bad. It was a setup, and they had no idea who they were dealing with. Naomi Brooks wasn't just a nurse. She wasn't just another black woman they thought they could intimidate. She was a CIA operative. She had spent the last 6 years deep undercover, tracking a domestic arms smuggling ring. She had infiltrated criminal networks, talked her way out of life or death situations, survived operations that had sent lesser agents home in body bags. And now two corrupt cops thought they could pin a drug charge on her. She clenched her jaw, carefully schooling her expression into one of controlled fear. She couldn't let them know she saw through their game. Not yet. Walker pulled out his cuffs. "Naomi Brooks, you're under arrest for possession and intent to distribute." A crackle of static burst from his radio, cutting him off. Then a voice came through. "Walker, Reed, where the hell are you? We got a situation downtown." For a split second, Naomi saw it, a flicker of hesitation. She had an opening, and she was going to take it. The cold steel of the handcuffs clicked shut around Naomi's wrists. The sensation wasn't unfamiliar. She had been trained for moments like this. But this time, it wasn't an exercise, it was real. And she was letting it happen. Walker gripped her arm, his fingers digging into her skin as he led her toward the squad car. Reed followed close behind, his smirk practically dripping with arrogance. Naomi didn't fight, didn't struggle. She simply exhaled and met Walker's gaze with unsettling calm. "You're making a huge mistake," she said evenly. Walker scoffed. "That's so?" Reed chuckled. "Yeah, sweetheart. The mistake was yours." Naomi didn't blink. If they thought she was just another terrified civilian, they had no idea what was coming. She let them push her into the back seat of the cruiser, the stiff plastic seat pressing against her back. As the door slammed shut, she glanced down at her lap, subtly adjusting the position of her hands. Her fingers found the small, almost invisible button embedded in the seam of her sleeve, a fail-safe all CIA operatives carried in deep cover. A single press sent a silent distress signal transmitting her location to her team. Activated. She leaned back, tilting her head slightly to listen. Walker and Reed were talking in the front seat, their voices low but tense. "Get this squared away before anyone asks questions," Walker muttered. Reed snorted. "Relax. She's got no priors, no connections, just another nobody. She'll take the deal, or she'll rot." Naomi's lips barely twitched. They really had no idea. As the car rumbled to life and pulled onto the darkened road, Naomi turned her gaze to the window. The familiar streets of Arlington passed in a blur of neon signs and flickering traffic lights. She counted the seconds. Her team was already moving. They would track the signal, pull up the traffic cam footage, run her arrest against internal databases. And when they realized who she was, when they traced this setup back to Walker and Reed, these two were going to wish they had never laid eyes on her. But until then, she had to play the part. She kept her expression carefully neutral, only letting a hint of worry flicker across her face when Walker glanced at the rearview mirror. Let them believe she was scared. Let them think they had the upper hand, because when the time came, she wouldn't just walk out of that police station, she would burn it to the ground. The fluorescent lights of the police station buzzed overhead, casting a harsh, artificial glow over the worn tile floors. The stale scent of burnt coffee and cheap disinfectant filled the air. Naomi sat on a hard metal chair in the processing room, her hands still cuffed behind her back. Walker leaned against the desk in front of her, arms crossed, a smug grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. Reed stood nearby, hands on hips, looking just as pleased with himself. "You don't have much to say now, do you?" Walker taunted, tilting his head. Naomi lifted her gaze, her expression unreadable. "I've already told you, you're making a mistake," Reed scoffed. "Oh yeah? And what exactly are we supposed to be afraid of? You think some fancy lawyer's gonna come bail you out?" Naomi just stared at him. "You have no idea who you just handcuffed." Across the room, Officer Ryan Mitchell sat at his desk, his fingers idly tapping the keyboard as he glanced toward the interrogation. He was young, 25, fresh-faced, still idealistic enough to believe in the badge he wore. Something about this arrest didn't sit right with him. He had watched Walker and Reed bring Naomi in, both of them grinning like they had just hit the jackpot. He had heard the way they talked to her, like they had already decided she was guilty. And then there was the evidence. Mitchell frowned, pulling up Naomi Brooks' record. Clean. No prior arrests, no history of drug-related activity. A nurse at Arlington General, according to her employment records. Nothing about her background suggested she was some street-level dealer. So why had Walker and Reed gone straight for a felony charge? His fingers hesitated over the keyboard. On a hunch, he ran a secondary search, one that most officers wouldn't bother with. Walker and Reed's arrest history. As the results loaded, a chill ran down Mitchell's spine. A pattern emerged. Over the past 3 years, Walker and Reed had arrested nearly a dozen individuals, mostly black men and women, for drug possession. And in nearly every case, the charges had been dropped due to insufficient evidence. No convictions. No actual follow-through. Mitchell's grip tightened on his mouse. They weren't making arrests to get criminals off the streets. They were padding their records, creating statistics, and now Naomi Brooks was their latest target. His stomach twisted. She wasn't just another unlucky civilian, and if his gut was right, she was far from powerless. Mitchell glanced up at Naomi through the station's glass partition. She hadn't broken under their taunts. She wasn't pleading, wasn't crying. She was watching. Calculating. Who are you? Mitchell's heart pounded as he clicked back to her record. He had to dig deeper, because something told him this woman was about to turn this whole department upside down. The quiet hum of the police station was shattered by the sudden arrival of 3 unmarked black SUVs pulling up outside. Their tinted windows reflected the flickering streetlights, obscuring the figures inside. Inside the station, Naomi remained seated, her hands still cuffed behind her back. She could feel the shift in the air, the subtle tension creeping into the space. Something was happening. Good. Her distress signal had gone through. Across the room, Ryan Mitchell sat at his desk, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. His anonymous email had been sent just minutes ago, detailing everything. The suspicious arrest patterns, the planted evidence, the way Walker and Reed operated without consequence. He hadn't expected an immediate response, but it looked like someone had been waiting for this information. The front doors burst open. A wave of federal agents stormed in, led by a tall, sharp-eyed man in a dark suit. The gold lettering on his badge gleamed under the station's harsh fluorescent lights. FBI. Walker and Reed straightened, their smug expressions flickering with confusion. "What the hell is this?" Walker muttered under his breath. The lead agent didn't waste time. "I'm Special Agent Marcus DeWitt, FBI. We have reason to believe there's been misconduct within this department, we'll need full access to all arrest records for the past 5 years, immediately." A heavy silence fell over the room. Walker forced a laugh. "Misconduct? That's a serious accusation, Agent. Mind telling me what this is about?" DeWitt's stare was cold. "We received an anonymous report of fabricated evidence and racially targeted arrests, and we have reason to believe that this woman," he gestured toward Naomi, still seated calmly in the interrogation room, "is not who you think she is." Naomi's lips twitched. "Finally." Reed shifted uncomfortably. "Look, this is insane. She was caught with drugs in her car. We followed protocol." DeWitt's gaze darkened. "Did you?" Mitchell swallowed hard, his heart pounding. He had never seen Walker look nervous before. But now, the man was sweating. Agents moved swiftly, pulling files, accessing computer logs. Naomi remained quiet, watching it all unfold. Walker and Reed were cornered, and they knew it. She exhaled slowly, rolling her shoulders. Any second now. One of the FBI agents turned toward DeWitt, holding up a file. His voice was clear, firm. "Sir, we've got multiple cases here that don't add up. And there's more. We just ran a quick background check on the suspect." He glanced at Naomi. "She's not in any civilian database." Walker's face went pale. Naomi smiled. "Checkmate." The tension in the station thickened as the FBI agents worked swiftly, combing through records and reviewing evidence. The once smug expressions on Walker and Reed's faces had begun to crack. Then the final nail in their coffin arrived. "Sir," an FBI tech analyst called out, holding up a tablet. "We pulled the security footage from the traffic stop." Agent DeWitt took the tablet and pressed play. The room fell silent. On the screen, the truth unfolded in grainy black and white. The footage from a nearby security camera captured Walker and Reed approaching Naomi's car. But before they even conducted the search, before they even opened her trunk, Walker was seen reaching into his pocket. A small plastic bag. He glanced over his shoulder. The street was empty. Then, with a casual flick of his wrist, he tossed the bag into the trunk. The station fell eerily quiet. Walker's face drained of color. Reed took a step back, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed hard. Naomi remained still, her expression unreadable. DeWitt's voice was like steel. "So, officers, care to explain this?" Reed opened his mouth, but no words came out, and then another FBI agent stepped forward. "Sir, we have something else." A second piece of evidence, a recording, a simple audio file. Click, play. The voices of Walker and Reed filled the room. "Walker, she's perfect. No priors, clean record. No one will question it. Think she'll fight it?" Walker, "Doesn't matter. She won't get the chance." The room turned ice cold. Walker clenched his jaw, his hands curling into fists. This is bullshit. That could be anyone." DeWitt turned the tablet around, pressing pause. "We ran a voice match. It's a 99.8% match to both of you." A sharp click echoed through the station. Handcuffs. Ethan Walker, Daniel Reed. DeWitt's voice was calm, controlled, lethal. "You are under arrest for evidence tampering, false arrest, and conspiracy to commit misconduct under the color of law." Two FBI agents stepped forward, grabbing Walker and Reed before they could even react. The same cold metal they had slapped onto Naomi's wrists now locked around their own. Walker thrashed. "You have no idea who you're messing with." Reed's face contorted in desperation. "This is a mistake." "That's what I said," Naomi murmured, tilting her head. "Remember?" Walker turned, rage flickering behind his eyes. But this time, Naomi wasn't the one in cuffs. She was free, and justice had just begun. The cold metal cuffs slipped from Naomi's wrists, clattering against the table as an FBI agent unlocked them. She rolled her shoulders, the stiffness from hours of restraint finally fading. She was free. Agent DeWitt stood beside her, offering a small nod. "You're clear to go, Miss Brooks." Naomi met his gaze. "Took you long enough." A smirk tugged at DeWitt's lips. "Had to make sure the case was airtight. We don't want them slipping through the cracks." Across the station, Walker and Reed were still restrained, their faces pale, their arrogance completely drained. The reality of their downfall had set in. "You'll regret this," Walker spat as an FBI agent patted him down. "You think we're the only ones? You have no idea how deep this goes." Naomi tilted her head. "Then I guess we'll keep digging." The FBI had already begun seizing files, interrogating officers, and cross-referencing arrest records. Walker and Reed's corruption was just the beginning. As she stepped out of the holding area, she spotted Ryan Mitchell standing by his desk, watching everything unfold. Their eyes met. "You did the right thing," Naomi said. Mitchell hesitated before nodding. "Didn't feel like it at first." Naomi understood. The station was already shifting. Some officers eyed Mitchell with disdain, whispering among themselves. He had turned on his own, exposed the rot from the inside, and not everyone was willing to forgive that. But others looked at him with something different. Respect. DeWitt approached them. "Mitchell, you ever think about working somewhere you won't have to cover for bad cops?" Mitchell let out a small chuckle. "You offering?" DeWitt shrugged. "We could use more officers like you." Mitchell glanced back at the station, his station. The place he had believed in, the place he had just helped dismantle. "I'll think about it." Naomi stepped past them, heading toward the exit. She had done what she needed to do here. Walker and Reed would face trial, and with the weight of the FBI behind the case, their chances of escape were slim. And the station? It would never be the same. Reforms were already underway. More officers were under investigation. Corruption that had thrived in the shadows was now being dragged into the light. Naomi pushed open the door, stepping into the cool night air. She inhaled deeply, filling her lungs with freedom. Justice wasn't always swift, but tonight it had been served. Months passed, but the impact of that night in Arlington Police Station never faded. The trial of Ethan Walker and Daniel Reed became a media spectacle, exposing a web of corruption that had gone unchecked for years. The evidence was overwhelming. The security footage, the recorded conversations, and the pattern of fabricated arrests. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty. Walker and Reed were sentenced to 25 years in federal prison without parole. Their past cases were reopened, and dozens of wrongfully convicted individuals were exonerated. The ripple effect of their downfall was undeniable. But it wasn't just about two bad cops. The trial ignited a national conversation about police corruption, racial profiling, and accountability. Protests erupted, not just in Arlington, but across the country, demanding sweeping reforms in law enforcement practices. Politicians, once reluctant to address the issue, were now forced to act. Policy changes were proposed, including stronger oversight on officers with repeated misconduct allegations and mandatory body cameras on all law enforcement personnel. The community refused to let this be just another scandal that faded into obscurity. Justice had been served, but the fight was far from over. Meanwhile, Ryan Mitchell faced his own reckoning. Though he was praised by federal investigators and reform advocates, his fellow officers were divided. Some viewed him as a hero, a man who had upheld his oath to protect and serve. Others saw him as a traitor. The station had changed. More corrupt officers were being investigated, some forced to resign, others charged with crimes. The culture of silence, the unspoken rule of protecting your own, was crumbling. One afternoon, he found an envelope on his desk. Inside was an official transfer offer from the FBI. He stared at it for a long time. Then, with a deep breath, he picked up a pen. It was time to move forward. And Naomi Brooks? She disappeared from the headlines just as quickly as she had appeared. No one knew her real story, and no one ever would. Because Naomi wasn't just a victim. She was an operative, a hunter in the shadows, someone who existed in a world few could comprehend. Walker and Reed had been a small piece of a much larger problem: systemic corruption, unchecked power, injustice hidden beneath bureaucracy. This wasn't the first time she had encountered it, and it wouldn't be the last. As she slipped into an unmarked black sedan, the city lights reflecting off the tinted glass, she pulled out her phone. A single, encrypted message awaited her. New target identified. Awaiting orders. Naomi smiled, tucking the phone away. The fight wasn't over, not even close.